Hey there, and welcome to Get Career Curious, a podcast that gives you the inside scoop on careers and what it takes to get there. Today's guest is Rich Naha, and he didn't follow the typical path after college. From sailing the British Virgin Islands to building a multi-million-dollar real estate and business portfolio, Rich proves that curiosity and risk-taking can lead to incredible opportunities. If you've ever wondered what it takes to break into commercial real estate, start your own business, or just land that first big opportunity after graduation, this episode is for you. Rich, we just want to thank you so much for coming on. Feel free to take the stage and give a little introduction about yourself.
Sure. My name's Rich Naha. I live in Denver, Colorado. I've got 3 sons that are all out of the house now. And for 35 years, been focused on real estate investments into startup businesses. I've had kind of 2 common denominators in those 35 years. And one is usually involved with the Hispanic community, and the other is building community. So whether it's real estate related or startup business, always focusing on building community.
That's awesome. You studied at University of Michigan. And so what drew you to study there? And then what did you study? And how did your time there influence the way you think about business and opportunity?
Yeah. Actually, when I was in high school in the 80s, I don't know, kids didn't really think that much about going out of state because the in-state tuition was so low. So when I grew up, if you had the grades to get into Michigan, you went there. And if you didn't, you'd go to a different school in the state. But the difference between in-state tuition and out-of-state tuition was a huge divide. I had the grades to get into Michigan, so that's where I went. And I studied electrical engineering because I was good at math and science. And I had an interest in electrical appliances. You know, the computers were just being developed, like the very first computers, and video games were just coming out. I started programming and had an interest in computers. And so I studied electrical engineering with a minor in computer science. And at the time, University of Michigan had the 3rd best program with electrical engineering. And it was a lot of math, which I think the engineering curriculum really sets you up to solve problems, because so much of your homework, when you read the problem, you start with, I have no idea what you're even talking about. And sometimes hours later, you arrive at a solution. It just trains you to approach a problem from different perspectives, because sometimes the first way that you go about it, doesn't work. And so you have to kind of go back to the beginning and start again from a different perspective or angle. And you just get resilient to sticking with it until you find the solution. And so I think that's kind of the skill that the engineering undergrad gave me the most. Any business owner deals with a lot of math. So the ability to calculate things and break evens, and to be negotiating, should I buy, this product at this cost or a different product at a different cost? And this one has a 2-year life and that one has a 4-year life, and to kind of quickly calculate those break evens so you can make a decision quickly when you're negotiating. If you always have to, say, I have to go back and figure that out or consult with somebody else, that kind of hampers your ability to negotiate because you're not armed with the knowledge that you need in the moment.
And so with that whole engineering route and then getting into business later, you didn't have the traditional into the business realm. So can you take us through your track a little bit? And I know you spent some time sailing in the British Virgin Islands. What did that teach you about life, work, and the connections you made from there, as well as through Michigan's connections?
Yeah, so I did a summer in college work in the British Virgin Islands, or actually the U.S. Virgin Islands. And what it taught me most was, I waited tables in a restaurant that was in a harbor where these really nice boats would pull in and people would come off their boats into the restaurant. And what it taught me the most was I wanted to be on the other side of the equation. I wanted to be on the sailboat pulling into a beautiful harbor versus waiting tables. And so it just really motivated me to be in business for myself, where I can be rewarded for my efforts versus a traditional career track where you have a salary and not much opportunity for upside if you work harder.
I gotcha. And then moving from there and kind of first job, you're at PwC, which I understand is a pretty structured environment. What kind of lessons from that and experience helped you later as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think it gave me a really good insight. I was in management consulting, and so management consultants go into businesses and you have to kind of learn what the business is like. And then you're tasked with trying to help them be more efficient. And so we did, a lot of cost benefit analysis studies where we take any kind of business process and look at 2 or 3 different ways to achieve the result or the goal. And then, really studying the different options and what is the cost and what is the benefit. And so as a business owner, everything is a cost benefit analysis, right? Like whether you're hiring a person or firing the person or, switching a new software provider, you literally list the benefits on one column and the costs on the other column and try to compare the apples and oranges sometimes to figure out what the best decision is. And it also taught me that I didn't want to be in corporate America because it is so structured and it is such a grind. And so it encouraged me to branch out and be more entrepreneurial.
For sure. And that honestly stems into my next question is what gave you the confidence to leave a stable corporate environment and build your own venture and invest in real estate on your own?
Yeah, actually with Pricewaterhouse, I got put on a project in Chicago and, they paid us $2,000 a month for our living stipend. And so most people go out and they get a corporate apartment that's furnished, that's month to month, and they use that $2,000, housing stipend to cover that corporate apartment. I said, well, they're paying me $2,000 a month, kind of regardless of where I live. So I bought a studio condo for $57,000 and used my $2,000 stipend to pay the mortgage and all the other expenses. And then I actually rolled off that project and I saw there were still people on that project that are getting $2,000 a month for their living stipend. So I just rented my apartment to them. That was kind of my first foray into real estate. And so then I bought a 2-unit building and also did similar corporate style apartments. And then just kept building and building and building and ended up with, 30-unit buildings and remodeling those. So I kind of gradually gained knowledge and comfort in owning real estate.
And for somebody in college who wants to get exposure to real estate, what kind of advice would you give to them now if they're trying to do it without much capital or connections starting off?
Yeah, if you want to get into real estate, as simple as being a real estate agent is an option, right? You study, pass a test, and then you can try to pick up some listings. And then through that process, you just learn more about the industry. I always recommend anyone, as soon as you know where you're going to be living and you're stable, to buy something so that you're building equity for yourself instead of paying rent, and buy something that if you move out would make a good rental.
And then what was your very first real estate investment and what did you learn from that deal?
It was actually that studio condo that I bought in Chicago. And so buying a building, where the maintenance is taken care of for you is definitely easier than, buying a house where if you move out and rent it to somebody, then you're responsible if the refrigerator goes out, and headaches like that you might not be prepared to take care of for the tenant.
And then going, into the future of real estate, obviously the market for many businesses is changing right now. How do you see real estate evolving due to things such as AI and advancements in technologies of that sort?
Yeah. So I think real estate agents and real estate brokers get paid very handsomely, basically to put buyers in touch with sellers. But the internet really does that. And so then what an agent or a buyer, how they can add value to a transaction. In residential real estate, they might know which schools are good. So if it's a family looking to buy a house, they can say, oh, this school is good and that's good. And there's a little coffee shop around the corner, and they can provide some of that neighborhood information or they could work with a family that wants to buy a house and, oh, how old are your kids? And, what are your interests in? Do you like to, go to sporting events and restaurants, or do you prefer, to help them decide if they live in the city or the suburb? But honestly, so much of that information is available, and AI could do a lot of that for a buyer or a seller. That I see the real estate industry pretty ripe for disruption with technology, and I see that coming quickly. Also, kind of more macro level real estate. The United States has 73 million baby boomers, and those are people born after World War II. They're all, I think the average age now is 65, so they're retiring, and in 20 or so years, those baby boomers won't be with us anymore, right? Statistically. And that's 73 million people that aren't going to be owning a house, renting a house, buying pizza on Friday night, paying their cell phone bill. So demographically, the US is going to have less people than it does today, which directly infers less GDP, and a lot of our financial statistics aren't going to look as good in 20 years. So conversely, that supply and demand, that's less demand on housing, but also with the amount of debt the US has as a country, really the only way to ever pay off that amount of debt or not let it spiral out of control is to make $38 trillion be not much money anymore, right? So to where anything that survives inflation well, like commodities, utilities, and housing, usually tracks well with inflation. So I think it's still a fine time to get into real estate because there will be a lot of inflation. Housing should keep up with it, but to kind of be mindful of the demographics of our country. So I wouldn't build senior housing right now, right? Like senior housing is a strong trend for 20 years because of the baby boomers, but in another 10 to 15 to 20 years, there will be less older people that need senior housing. So then supply and demand will shift.
With such kind of a changing environment, what advice would you give to junior, senior yourself in college looking to get into the real estate industry?
Yeah, I would just study trends. Where are people moving? With AI, more people can work remotely. So congested cities like Chicago, New York, and LA, their demand might decrease. But during COVID, things shifted a lot where people were working remotely. So people did leave the big cities and they did move to more rural places that had a higher quality of life, like Montana and resort towns around the country. And so that shift kind of already happened. And with AI, with more remote working, maybe that continues to happen. And I'd be mindful of things like sea levels rising, to go buy a place in Florida that might be underwater literally in 10, 20 years, or at least increased risk of hurricanes is a concern. And I think fresh water is another aspect of housing. People need food, water, shelter, and to go buy a place in the desert that's reliant on maybe some aquifer underground might not be a good idea. So being mindful of the water source, whether you're out around the Great Lakes in the Midwest or off of a river or a place that gets a lot of snow like the Rocky Mountains, and even looking internationally, countries that are seeing an increase in expats moving, Costa Rica, Portugal. So looking for stable democracies that have a good cost of living. A lot of Americans are just looking for different options for retirement.
And I guess my last question to do with student-based stuff before we get more into your career path. Networking, that's something I wanted to ask you about. You went to University of Michigan, which obviously has strong alumni connections, but what advice on building a network in any sort of business realm, real estate or other, would you give?
Yeah, I'd say as you meet people and work with people, just always be fair with everyone, because you never know when 20, 30 years from now, you'll be running into the same people. So I think just having good morals and ethics for working with people and networking is key, right? It's, no matter how smart you are, it's usually ends up being who you know more than what you know. Joining real estate clubs, joining social clubs, joining, other ways to be connected to people.
For sure. Yeah. Clubs are a great way. I started joining a couple and I've already met plenty of people that I'm like, this was worth it. So taking a little pivot towards Surf Synergy, I've obviously had the pleasure of getting to visit and it's awesome. How did you go from investing in properties to owning a luxury surf resort? And how did this career pivot come about? Was it kind of an impulsive one or one that took some time to make the decision for?
Sure. I've spent 30 years investing in real estate and about 20 years investing in small businesses. So I've had the experience of taking risks and being outside of my comfort zone and doing lots of spreadsheets, looking at forecasts. And so that kind of set me up for the situation. But really it was during COVID, my wife and I, our 3 sons, we went to Costa Rica for a week and it turned into 4 months. And we had no intention of learning to surf when we got there, but we met a couple national champion surfers and they taught us to surf and then taught us the breathing techniques where they got our breath holds up to 4 minutes and then started layering on different wellness modalities like yoga and meditation and sauna and ice bath and temazcals and just different wellness modalities that weren't really offered in daily life in Colorado back in those days. But, we just said, wow, this is an amazing way and this to live life. And this is how we want to live our lives. So we bought a little property and really launched the business on a whim, thinking that, well, if the business doesn't survive, we can use the property for our retirement. And that's another thing. Usually with the startup businesses I was involved with, they usually involved real estate so that if the business didn't survive, I knew the worst case scenario was always, well, at least I'll have the land or the property, the building. So we launched the business really on a whim and the reviews started rolling in. So we upgraded the bungalows that existed at the time. We built out a commercial kitchen and hired a culinary team. And I give a lot of credit to our co-founder, Marcel, who just stuck to his values from day one with the integrity of the ingredients and the service level that we provided from day one, kind of regardless of the cost. It wasn't about being profitable. The first year was about delivering a certain level of service to the customer, the guest. And so people loved it and they came back and they told a friend. And so we expanded the property even more. And now we just named #1 destination spa in the world by Travel and Leisure magazine. And that's all based on kind of sticking to our values from the beginning. And now with things expanding even more, kind of doubling down on making sure we don't deviate from who we are and why the business started in the first place. We're not going to open up another franchise satellite location in another area just because there's an opportunity to make more money. Surf Synergy was founded on supporting that local community there in Costa Rica and founded on kind of building out a community of like-minded people. And so we're going to kind of stick to that and see where it goes in the future.
For sure. And congratulations on all the success there with Surf Synergy. What would you say a typical day looks like running the business, and how have you balanced luxury hospitality with wellness and surfing all in one?
Yeah, it's actually super challenging because we do use surfing to get people into flow state, to open their minds, be willing to try some of these alternative wellness modalities. Most people do not want to do an ice bath when they arrive at Surf Synergy, but we take them surfing, and when they're done surfing, they're a little sore, right? They're tired. And we explain to them that 3 minutes in an ice bath has this huge long list of metaphysical benefits that get them back surfing the next day, which they just had success surfing, so they want to do it again. And here they can do an ice bath. We use surfing to, get them into these other modalities and try new things and be outside of their comfort zone. And surfing in Costa Rica is based on the tide. And so the tide changes by an hour every day, which completely disrupts all the operations. So the average hotel around the world, they know breakfast is from 6 to 8. They know lunch is from 11 to 1 and dinner. And so they can, plan those meals. Their staffing is consistent. And with our operations, our logistics change every day by an hour. And it's very difficult to manage all of that. And so it was really mostly hiring people who understood that they were part of a small company, a startup company, and that their responsibilities kind of change every day. And sometimes they have to pick up and do something that they weren't hired to do to kind of help the team. And so it was hiring team players and people that were passionate about having this positive impact on people's lives, and knowing that in exchange for that, the work routine is going to be a little hectic.
Basically, with all the different wheels spinning with it, and you talked about that it's something you've been passionate about for a while. What's your favorite part, I'm wondering, about running the business? And what are some of the more challenging parts that you warn people about before starting something on their own?
Yeah, definitely lots of challenges. Running a business in another country is challenging. The rules, the labor laws, there's just a lot to learn and know about and be conscious of. Costa Rica is considered a third world country with air quotes, because I think Costa Rica does a lot of things better than the US, frankly. But there are things that are challenging to do business in Costa Rica. The banking is difficult, the tax structure, and just different parts of running the business, the labor laws, how you have to keep the contracts. And so there's lots of pitfalls in doing that, but the rewards are every Saturday seeing the look in people's eyes when they check out and knowing that we had a positive impact on their life. That's reward enough for everybody. It recharges everybody's batteries to do it again the next week. We run out retreat every week of the year. So it's a lot of work for the staff, but having that impact on people's lives is probably my favorite part. And then as we build out kind of the Surf Synergy community, we're getting in, bringing people together more often as they come back as repeat guests. And we're building out this online community where people are connected more. And I think ultimately, when somebody asks what we do at Surf Synergy, I say we build community. We're connecting like-minded people who want to live this healthy, adventurous wellness lifestyle. And so building out that community of people and seeing the happy, smiling faces of people coming back for a 6th, 7th, 8th time is my reward. And then I also got addicted to surfing. And so I'm trying as hard as I can to work on my surfing, but every day in the water, anytime you ride a wave in any form or fashion is an amazing feeling. So I want to do that for as long as I can. And in order to do that for a long time, taking care of my health is a critical component of that.
For sure. And I can vouch for that. If you guys haven't surfed, it's awesome. You should really check out Surf Synergy. Rich, taking a bigger picture look at everything that we've talked about with your career, what's the biggest risk that you would say you've took that's paid off? And I guess, how did you know that it was the time to make that risk?
Yeah. The biggest risk when investing in startup businesses, every risk feels huge when you're taking it. And, the ones sometimes that you don't expect to take out, like Surf Synergy, I honestly launched the business with very, very low expectations of it taking off, but it also was like a kind of, in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't that big of a risk. I'd say to anyone listening that, is nervous about taking a risk, that's completely normal. And if you're not nervous buying your first house or not nervous investing in a company, then something's wrong, because, if you're investing your hard-earned money in something, you should be nervous and you should be very focused on what you can do to kind of minimize the risk. I've invested in a couple businesses that might have had more risk up front and more return down the road, but we've got another project in Aurora, Colorado, which is really a small Mexican village. It's a former Super Kmart that 160,000 square feet. And you walk in and you feel like you're in a Mexican village. There's a big fountain in the middle. There's 100 vendors. There's 26 restaurants and a gym and a grocery store and a PlayStation and medical salon and clinic. And so that was a huge risk. And now it's up and running and it's firing on all cylinders and it's an amazing thing for the community. But then there's also more risk that just happened 8 months ago with the new immigration policy, and anyone that's here on a visa or here illegally, they're nervous to be out in public. So that might have a continued impact on that business and that investment that we weren't predicting 3 years ago when we started the project. So there's always risk. And I think to invest in anything, whether it's real estate, businesses, you just have to have a stomach for the risk and good analytical skills to measure the risk and the return, right? So there's a cost and a benefit to everything. And then there's an amount of risk and then there's a return. And that return should always be commensurate with the risk that you're taking. So if you're buying a CD, that's a very low risk and you're going to get a low return, and that's fine. You should have some of that too. But to invest in a business like this one in Aurora, it was a big risk. And so the return should also be on the larger side.
Sure. My last question for you, Rich, is just what's one piece of advice that you hope, if somebody's watching this and takes away, what piece of advice would that be that you really want to get across to them?
I would say look at the trends as macro as possible. Even stock brokers say, oh, yes, there's, stock market dips, but that's the time to buy. But you look at the macro environment worldwide for the last 500 years, and that hasn't always been true, right? There's societies and countries that have come and gone, and, the world is very global now. And so never get kind of pigeonholed into thinking, well, that's how it always has been. It might always have been that way in your life or your family's life, but a lot of people came here as immigrants 100 to 250 years ago, and they came from societies that were very different and took a risk to come here. And just kind of always keep an open mind and don't put blinders on and get pigeonholed into thinking that just because the graph looked like this for the last 30, 40 years that it's going to keep doing that, because AI is going to change a lot of things. I'd say, take measured risks, start small and get your Excel spreadsheet out.
Sure. Get the technicals down. I actually got one more for you, Rich, just a personal question, but it applies to a lot of college kids anyways that would benefit in kind of all careers, which is just like going through the internship process and the job hiring process. What would you recommend as another piece of advice for trying to get a job or get an internship and connect with bigger companies? It's obviously a very big realm to get involved in.
Yeah, it's where the networking comes back into play, to know somebody who works somewhere and they can, put a good word in for you, because to just apply online, those lists are all very long. So anything you can do to leverage your network and or get your experience at a smaller company. My oldest son is working at a small medical device company, and, he tried to get a job at Stryker, but so did 100,000 other people. So very difficult to get your foot in the door at Stryker. But if you can start at a smaller company, maybe you're making less money, but you're getting even more experience, because smaller companies, you typically have you getting experience in many different facets of the business. So don't be shy to start at a smaller company.
Sure. Thank you so much, Rich. I know I've learned a lot from this interview for myself. I hope everyone listening has as well. But yeah, we would just like to say again, thanks for joining the Get Career Curious pod, and hope to see you soon back in Colorado or Costa Rica.
Yeah, Costa Rica. Yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
come on down.
Wow, what an incredible conversation with Rich Naha. From taking a gap year to sail the Caribbean to building a thriving career in commercial real estate as well as entrepreneurship, Rich reminds us that success doesn't always follow a linear line. Here are a few of my favorite takeaways from my conversation with Rich Naha. First, don't be afraid to take calculated risks. Sometimes the boldest moves lead to the biggest amount of growth and the most amount of learning. Second, build real relationships. The people you meet today can open doors that you didn't even know existed down the line. So make sure to respect everyone you come across paths with. And third, remember, your first job isn't your forever job. Every experience is helping to build your foundation. Now, let me take a second to ask you, are you still figuring out your next steps in your career journey? Well, I know I am. So whether you're pretty sure of what career you want, have no clue, or somewhere in between, we at Get Career Curious are here to help. Please check out the Career Compass, an AI-powered career exploration tool built just for our Get Career Curious community. What it does is it helps you discover careers that align with your unique strengths, interests, and values. A bunch of my friends and I have all taken the assessment, and the results have been super. They've given me a bunch of different career paths that would fit my interests, skills, and ultimately my passion. You can find the link in the show notes or on our website. And as always, thank you for listening and being part of this community. Stay tuned for more episodes. Thanks.